but it was atrocious. And white people are like, dang, those white people were awful. But now they're gone, so whatever. and then that's
Yikes.
it. Which is part of the reason why it's so hard for us to speak up, because people are so used to ignoring us. And whenever you introduce yourself as, like, whenever I introduce myself as, oh, I'm Ojibwe, like, my responses are either like, what? Because people just like straight up don't know, and it's like, okay, seriously, like, or they'll be like, oh, no way, how much? It's just like,
Yeah.
gosh, like, it's like the microaggressions are crazy.
Hey everyone, I'm here with my friend Lizzy. We met through Greenpeace. RIP, Greenpeace.
Yeah, I heard about that.
Yeah, it's really depressing, but I met a lot of cool people through Greenpeace, so eternally grateful. So Lizzy has been making really awesome, informative videos on her Instagram page the past couple weeks about Indigenous erasure and cultural appropriation as an Indigenous woman. So I thought it'd be cool to bring her on and talk about these things. She might be starting a YouTube channel, so.
Yeah.
So first things first, introduce yourself. Yeah, go for it.
Right on. So my name is Lizzy. I am Ojibwe. I'm from Michigan originally. I do have family that lives on a reservation. My reservation is called Bay Mills Indian Community. It's in the Upper Peninsula. It's right on the shores of Lake Superior. So yeah, holy shit. And I have cats that I'm fostering, and they raise hell. So I'm really sorry if they get distracting. If they get too distracting, I will put them in their shame closet. And then I do beadwork as well, which is a traditional craft. Beadwork is sacred to many Native peoples, including the Ojibwe. And so it's linked to my personal page as well. But my beadwork page is called Chickadee Beading. You can find me on Instagram. Yeah.
Did you make these?
Yeah, I made these. These are
awesome.
actually the first florals that I made for myself.
That's awesome.
Because the Ojibwe use a lot of florals, and obviously we're in the woods and we're by the water, so we have a lot of that influence in our work. Whereas like Plains Indians and people in the Southwest, you get a lot of geometrics and things like that.
So my first question for you is, what is cultural appropriation versus appreciation?
Okay.
Because a lot of people are confused about that.
Yeah, so a lot of people are really confused about that. And the easiest way to remember it is, so first of all, appreciation is something everyone can appreciate. So if whatever you're doing is respectful, and the origin is clearly stated, and Indigenous people look at it and go, wow, that's pretty nice, then congratulations, you're appreciating, and then everyone appreciates it. But what makes appropriation is that appropriation is inherently damaging. And so a lot of people think like, well, what, I can't do anything without it being appropriation. It's like, well, not anything, but at the same time, if you are taking something, if you are not crediting its origin, or you are taking something that is sacred and you're making it casual, then nobody appreciates that. So there's a lot of things. A really easy example of something that's just like, there's no other argument on appropriation is like wearing headdresses, like it's not right for Indigenous people to wear headdresses if you haven't earned them. Headdresses, every feather is earned. And obviously the particular tradition varies between Indigenous groups. Not every Indigenous group has the same experience, and not every person within Indigenous groups has the same experience, which it's a concept that's called pan-indigeneity, or pan-Indianism. And that's an important thing to consider when you're looking at Indigenous issues, because while the word Indigenous is good because it unites us all with our common struggle, not every Indigenous group is the same. Not every Indigenous group was colonized by the same group. We weren't all treated with the same policies. Some were relocated, some were assimilated, some were relocated and then assimilated, many were massacred. So and then, where you are now. So I am what we call an urban Indian. I grew up in Detroit, and I would spend summers and winters up on the reservation with my family, but I didn't grow up there. So my experience is not the same as my Ojibwe cousins who are growing up on the reservation. So that's just a quick note on like Pan-Indianism, and to remember that like when you're looking at Indigenous problems, it's not all the same. But back to cultural appropriation versus cultural appreciation in general, it's important that the things that are a part of Indigenous culture remain our culture, because we are the only group, and again, this is when I say we, this is like the larger Indigenous peoples of the world, are the only group that are actually still facing like pointed and targeted genocide. And so it's been reworded to be nice for people to stomach the fact that they're contributing to it. And it also gets taught to us as we are in school, this idea that Indigenous people are either all gone already, or that if they're not gone, they're going to be gone soon, so it doesn't really matter to pay attention to them. This is something that we call Indigenous Erasure. Basically, sounds like it's exactly what it sounds like.
Yeah.
But
that's what I was going to ask. Sorry to interrupt.
No,
but what you meant by genocide was specifically regarding erasure of culture, or
so
a literal sense as well? Yeah,
in a literal sense as well. And again, this is one of those things where some groups are facing this more than other groups. But the genocide is coming about in two like main ways. One is cultural genocide, and the other is actual blood genocide. Colonialism is basically the tidal wave that brought this on, and colonialism is still a huge part of our society. I'll talk about the Unist'ot'en a little bit later, but the Unist'ot'en is like a very clear example of how colonial governments are still using the exact same methods of colonialism that have been used historically, and people don't think that they're still going on because you learn about it in history, and then you stop learning about it in history, and you're like, oh, that means it's done, but it's never been done. Does that clarify a little bit on Indigenous erasure?
Yeah. So just to like recap so I fully understand, appreciation is like, for example, I have a dream catcher in my car, but I bought it from an Indigenous artist.
Dream catchers are actually a great example. I don't know exactly where you bought it from. I don't know if you'll remember. And this is another good example when you're looking at like, there is no like native culture that is all inclusive. So actually, dream catchers are Anishinaabe/Ojibwe. Anishinaabe is the larger people, basically. The Anishinaabe split off into multiple what we consider tribes, and the Ojibwe is one of them. So I am Anishinaabe and I am Ojibwe. Dream catchers are Anishinaabe. And so if someone who was Sioux, for example, made a dream catcher, that would still be appropriation. So, you don't get a blank check just because you're like any kind of Indigenous. So there are a lot of like parts of like what people largely consider Indigenous culture that isn't Indigenous, it's Ojibwe. And so I don't know if you bought the dream catcher from someone that's Ojibwe, but if you wanted to buy a dream catcher, like you can absolutely buy a dream catcher. And just go buy it from someone that's Ojibwe, and there's no appropriation being done here. You're paying the money to someone, like an Ojibwe person is benefiting from that. And we sell our like cultural crafts and our wares for everybody. And the things that you can't buy are the things that you won't be able to buy. So like somebody commented on one of the posts like, well, if I buy a headdress from a reservation and then wear it to Coachella, it's okay. And it's like, well, first of all, you wouldn't be able to buy a headdress. And if you could buy a headdress, like it would literally be like $1,000 or more. So like, sure, if you really want to buy one, like, and then wear it to Coachella to be that guy, like, but you're not going to do that, and they're not going to sell it to you because it's earned. But if you want to buy a dream catcher, you can buy a dream catcher. If you want to buy beadwork, like, yes, these are things that you can buy. If an Indigenous person is going to sell it to you, you can buy it. It really depends on who you ask too, because like there is a divide in the Native community about some of these things. Cultural appropriation is probably one of the more controversial things to talk about, because then you have things like ribbon shirts or ribbon skirts. And like for me personally, like I don't make them, and so I don't have to deal personally with the like, am I going to sell to non-natives? But it would just seem weird to me if a non-native was wearing a ribbon skirt, because it's like, why?
Now that I think
So
about it, like I do remember buying it from an indigenous person on my road trip. I think it was in either Colorado or New Mexico. But the fact that I like don't remember what tribe like I purchased it from shows that like it's like a
and
little
it
bit
could
of
have been,
appropriation here. Like I
yeah,
don't.
New Mexico could have been like Navajo.
Yeah.
But in any case, it's really important to be respectful. The first thing that like you really need to do is just be aware, which is part of the reason, like it is the reason why I'm starting to speak out more now, is because people like don't know, or even if they do know, they just keep acting like they don't because enough people don't know that it's a like decent alibi. So I'm screaming this from the rooftops because
Yeah.
like people need to be respectful. We're not going away, but at the same time, like it's hard because it's like we're fighting for not going away, and like we are still definitely here, but at the same time, like all of the forces are kind of against us in terms of trying to dilute our culture to the point where we can't really have it anymore. Because ultimately, it's issues of sovereignty, right? So indigenous nations are sovereign from the United States, but we're also in dealing with the United States, so it's a really complicated overall situation. The United States government stopped signing treaties with any indigenous group after the 1860s because they realized that by signing treaties with a group, you are granting them sovereignty. You're like acknowledging the legitimacy of them being a separate group than you. And so they stopped signing treaties after the 1860s. And then they tried to draft legislation that made it so that they didn't have to deal with us anymore at all. And the reason why that legislation didn't work well, you please stop. Is because Native people were like, no, we're your problem forever. You don't get to like either give us America back or you have to deal with us forever. You can't just write legislation to make us no longer your problem and then cut us off. Like, and so that's kind of like where things are even still, but they are trying to take away the sovereignty. And so one of the ways that they want to take it away is to make it so that there's no clear line between Native American people and just regular old American people. And that's part of the reason why like none of these issues are ever brought up, because it's actually in their best interest for our culture to just be kind of like slowly pulled apart bit by other people. And if you don't give it credit, then all of a sudden like, oh, you have no real like defining culture, so you're just like everybody else, and now we don't have to grant you sovereignty. So like that's when I said there's two different parts of it. So that's the cultural part. They're trying to dilute the culture, and then they're also trying to actually dilute bloodlines, and that's where blood quantum comes in. And blood quantum is a pretty complicated topic, so I'm going to keep it real short. But basically, in the very beginning, when they were assigning people blood quantum, they like literally used phrenology. They were measuring skulls to try to like determine who was full blood and half blood. And then sometimes they would just split up siblings and be like, so I have a twin sister, and like they'd be like, all right, I'm full blood, but she's half blood. And like, so blood quantum like started off already completely wrong. And so when people are like, how much are you? It's like literally they never started with accurate numbers. So it's like literally a white lie. Basically, long story short, blood quantum is whack, and it's racist to ask someone who introduces themselves as indigenous, how much are they? Because bitch, I'm 100%. But anyway, yeah, blood quantum could take up the whole video, so we'll move on from that for now. But basically, they introduced this idea of blood quantum, and then they policed intermarriage, which is a confusing word because the definition involves literally the two opposites of what I'm trying to talk about. But when I say intermarriage, I mean marriage between the tribe, because intermarriage also means marriage between races, so it's very confusing. But holy shit, cat, move. They're like pouncing on my fucking ring light and shit. It's like, oh my god. Okay, sorry. So they would police intermarriage and literally try to get it so that like you were not enough bloodline to be considered native, and then they would just consider you white and then just like kick you out into the real world, and you've been stripped of everything you know.
So regarding blood quantum, like, how do you feel about people like Elizabeth Warren claiming they're indigenous? Like, what
makes me want to die. Thanks for asking. It makes me want to die. And one time, dude, this was in Colorado at one of the markets, And I was having this conversation with a Trump supporter, which was the first mistake. And I like said that I was Indigenous. He was like, "Like Elizabeth Warren," and I was like, "Wow, I hate you, and I hate." Here's the thing. There's a lot of complicated factors that go into you identifying as Native American. So if you know that your great-great-great-grandmother was Sioux, and that's it, that's all you know, and your parents have no connection to the tribe has no connection to you, like, and you don't know anything about the culture, and all you know is that like probably like 3% of you is Sioux, like, you're not Sioux. If you feel the need to introduce yourself as part something, you're not. Because as what we know as Indigenous people is that blood quantum was made up by the white man to try to get rid of us. And it's an idea that is largely rejected within the community. And if it's not being rejected, it's because it's really internalized. Or because of people like Elizabeth Warren, where it's like, oh my God, I hate that we really have to like pull this shit out. It'd be like, okay, fine. Here's the certificate that says that I'm like, here's my tribal certificate that says I'm in this tribe. Like, do you have it, Elizabeth? Let's see it. You know? But the shitty thing is that to be in tribes, it is monitored by blood quantum still, because ultimately the federal government, the relationship between the government and Indigenous nations is what polices them to accept people or reject people in a lot of cases. And so, you know, for me to get accepted into my tribe, I had to be at least 25%, you know? And so blood quantum is still something that is used to determine if you're worthy enough to be included. But what's really like upsetting about that is then like you do have to worry about like, well, what if I marry a white person and then like, are my kids going to be accepted? Like, am I the period at the end of the sentence because of these policies? It is like, it's really stressful. And so that's the kind of thing when you're looking at Indigenous people in their future and like the way that like colonialism and racism and all of that like affects us all the time, is like now you're starting to like actually think about like, do I have to make different life choices, or do I have to like reject the people that I have come to love because I'm concerned about my children and their like ethnic identity, because like the government and everyone else, holy shit, surprise, there's two of them and they're both raising hell. Yeah, there's a catch for there. I didn't just throw them into nothing.
What are like the major issues that are on your radar facing Indigenous people today?
So there's 3 ones that I want to talk about briefly, and I will keep it brief, but I can also send you some stuff if you want to like put links underneath the video.
Yeah,
or something
totally.
like that. Okay, so the first one that I'm going to talk about is the Navajo COVID crisis. Some people have probably heard of this, some people maybe not. This is actually an issue that has been in the news just because COVID's in the news. And it has been in the news because the Navajo are getting hit really, really, really hard by COVID. They actually surpassed New York and New Jersey for per capita COVID infection rate. And some of the things that contribute to them getting hit so hard by COVID is, for one, just geographical location. And 30 to 40% of their residents don't have access to running water. So they can't wash their hands or practice, you know, sanitation practices that would help them keep COVID rates down. And then also so many people live together because Indigenous communities are very communal, and a lot of times many generations live together in the same house or in the same like couple of houses in an area. And so the infection can just spread super fast. And then also there's a shortage on grocery stores. And right now, because obviously the COVID rates are so bad, they have one of the most strict stay-at-home mandates. And so a lot of people are unemployed, which is making it even harder. And so would be really awesome if people that are seeing this video could go find some COVID relief. There's multiple different funds. They're all legitimate. That's a really good thing to donate to because it helps with the families. It helps get tests out. It helps get care packages around to people that can't work, and just like helps keep them financially up and to get through this. Because this is just one clear example of how when something goes wrong, it will disproportionately affect minority groups. So another thing to pay attention to right now is what's happening with the Wet'suwet'en people in British Columbia. So this has been going on for years, and it was starting to get a lot of momentum earlier this year. That was when I made a PowerPoint for you guys at Greenpeace, and I did a lot of raising awareness on Instagram and, with people that I know. Long story short, on that topic, the Wet'suwet'en people are protecting their land. The Canadian government has agreed to put a pipeline, which is called the Trans-Canadian Pipeline, I believe, through their land, and it is unceded territory. It is breaking laws. It is breaking treaties. The UN issued a statement telling them to stop, and it has failed all of its environmental testing, and yet they are still moving forward with the pipeline. This is like the most clear-cut example right now of how colonialism is very much alive. They were arresting people for protesting on their land. And when I say arresting, I mean people were going to jail. They were taking them off of their land, which they had no right to be on, and putting them in jail. And this was building a lot of momentum. They were shutting down Canada. Protests all over Canada were shutting the place down. They were blocking railways, roads, harbors, everything. It was awesome. And then COVID happened. All of a sudden, nobody could protest anymore. And same as before, they just kept moving forward with this pipeline. And so now more than ever, it's really important to get this word out so that the government doesn't, it's only when people speak up that they really start to move against this. And the Canadian government is racist. They are so racist, particularly
woke Trudeau is racist.
Yeah, and then particularly against their Indigenous groups. Indigenous population is larger in Canada. People are more aware of the fact that they exist. In America, people just pretend that they don't exist and they don't really pay attention to their problems, and that's the racism that we experience, is just not being heard. But it's very blatant in Canada that they're like, oh, we hear you because you're shutting down our railways, but they're so racist. Go to Unist'ot'en.camp, which I'll send you the link for that, because people are like, Una what? Unist'ot'en, it's the camp clan, and that's where you can donate to the Unist'ot'en Legal Fund, because this is a situation where in order for the tribe to fight against this injustice, they have to go to court, and to go to court, you have to have a lot of money. And so donating to the Unist'ot'en Legal Fund will, help them with the legal fees to fight this battle, because it's a battle that they should have won already. The last issue that I'm going to bring up really quick is the issue with missing and murdered Indigenous women. So the U.S. Department of Justice said that Native women face murder rates that are 10 times the national average. And the Center for Disease Control and Prevention Homicide said that homicide is the third leading cause of death for girls and women aged 10 to 24 that are Native American, and is the fifth leading cause of death for women 25 to 34 years of age.
Yikes.
And this has been a part of our history forever. So this is nothing new. The real story behind Pocahontas. And those are just two quick facts, because the stories are honestly endless. So this is one that you should do a Google search for sure. Mm-hmm. But to help you understand why this is the case, one is there is an issue, again, with the sovereignty. So the government they'll use it to their advantage when it's to their advantage, and they won't when it's not, which is, super our government. But the biggest reason why these women never get found, they never even look for them. And the reason why they never look is because of jurisdictional issues. So basically, it'll happen on the res, or they'll get kidnapped from the res, and local, federal, state governments are all going to say, oh, it's out of our jurisdiction because it happened on the res, or she is a citizen of the res, which makes these women incredibly vulnerable. And then on top of that, just, issues that come with poor funding in a lot of these communities. And so when you donate to funds that help go towards the No More Stolen Sisters initiative, you are helping a lot of things. This is why I need so much money, is because like you're helping for community support. So kind of along the same reasoning when people are saying like defund the police and this is how it's going to work, basically the same thing, where if you invest back into the community, you will help with, you'll help with the addiction rates, you'll help with the domestic abuse rates, you'll help children, learn healthy behaviors. And
so
great.
Just for brevity's sake, we can leave a bunch of resources in the description that elaborate some of these things. But I did want to ask you, what was your experience with like history classes at school and the whitewashing? And then what can people do to help?
Yeah, so the funny thing, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, and a lot of people have been asking me this question with my experience in school. So the first time I remember hearing about Indigenous people at all was when we went over what happened on Thanksgiving, which was in kindergarten. And the funny thing is that they wanted to do a little skit, with the Pilgrims and the Indians, and we're all going to have a meal, and yay. And when I was hearing about this, I went up to the teacher and I was like, hey, I'm actually Native American. Can I be one of the Indians? And they dead ass made me be a pilgrim.
What?
Yeah.
What?
They made me be a pilgrim. I asked to be an Indian and they made me be a pilgrim, which, like, okay. But obviously what they teach children happened on Thanksgiving is not at all accurate. Through elementary school, I remember there was a unit where they talked about, these were the Native American people. They were here first, and they were hunters and gatherers, and they went over like the very basics of how people survived. And so they taught, so I grew up in Michigan, and so obviously this unit would be like geographically based. But so they told us about the three fires, which are the Anishinaabe. And I don't remember if they told us the name. I think that they like mentioned that it was the Potawatomi, the Ottawa, and the Ojibwe, but I don't know how much they probably called us the Chippewa. So Chippewa is also the Ojibwe. Basically, it was just the French people that came to colonize. Couldn't say Ojibwe, and Chippewa was their best guess. So learned about that, and I just remembered I loved it. I loved every second of that unit, and it was too short. And then the other thing that they teach you is stuff like Squanto. And so in early education, when you're learning about the natives, here's what they want you to basically think. They want you to think that, so first they tell you about the Pilgrims, and then they tell you about natives once they get here. And so it starts with white people. Our history starts with white people. And when they come and they step foot on the land, which they immediately recognized was their promised land, they then teach you that the natives were super nice and helpful, and we taught them how to grow corn and things like that. And the whole point of this is to teach children very young that this land is so like God-given yours that even the Native Americans were like, damn, you should have it. And that we were super nice to them, and we had feasts and everyone got along, and that's the natives. They gave it to us. They gave us the land. And then you don't learn much more about it until you're hitting Lewis and Clark, and you learn about Sacagawea, which again, really nice native lady who knew so much about the land and was so invested in helping these white dudes get all the way across it. Manifest destiny. Yeah, let's manifest it for you. Woo. So they teach you about that. And then they teach you about the Trail of Tears. By this time, you're like in 8th grade. I remembered Lewis and Clark, and then they got into like Jacksonian policy and the Trail of Tears. And then we went into the Civil War. And from the Civil War in 8th grade through high school, we did not talk about Native people one time. Instead, you start learning about things like World War I, World War II, the forming of the UN, the Cold War, and then on into, things like that. We learned to the Arab-Israeli conflict. And these are all really important things to learn about, but they stop telling you about Indigenous people after the Trail of Tears, and there's a reason. Because what happens? What happens to us after the Trail of Tears? And then people think, well, we don't hear about it, so it must be nothing. They must be dead. Because when they're telling you the Trail of Tears, the things that happened were atrocious.
Right.
And the death toll was atrocious. And the Trail of Tears, first of all, is not the only, like, it's kind of like a general name, and there like was one relocation that is regarded as the Trail of Tears, and it actually went through Chattanooga, which is where I am right now, because I see signs absolutely everywhere that mark that it was the original route for the Trail of Tears. Marches like that, there were many, and they were all brutal, and a lot is an understatement. I don't even know how to like magnify this, but it was atrocious. And white people are like, dang, those white people were awful, but now they're gone, so whatever. and then that's
Yikes.
it. Which is part of the reason why it's so hard for us to speak up, because people are so used to ignoring us. And whenever you introduce yourself as, like, whenever I introduce myself as, oh, I'm Ojibwe, like, my responses are either like, what? Because people just like straight up don't know, and it's like, okay, seriously, like, or they'll be like, oh no way, how much? It's just like,
Yeah.
gosh, like, it's like the microaggressions are crazy. But
Yeah. And we still have Andrew Jackson on our $20 bill.
Yeah, so and like,
Well,
I remember having to write an essay where they were like, because basically he was a really controversial president because he like had a bunch of policies that were super great for America, and then he also like hated Native Americans and like would do anything in his power to make sure that they were all dead, or so far out of his vision that he never had to think about them ever again. And so we had to write an essay on whether or not you thought that he was a good president, and I was like, but yeah, so that's that. But basically what you can do to help, and you being generally what you can do to help. Awareness is the first step. Don't just hide behind a shroud of ignorance and let other people deal with these issues. We are a people that do need attention, because our problems are, first of all, if you call yourself a humanitarian in any right whatsoever, you should care about the problems that only pertain to us. But also, a lot of the things that we're fighting for are for everybody. We're protecting the water and the land. That's for everybody. If you feel like super content with an oil company putting a pipeline through, it doesn't even matter that it's unceded indigenous land. It's beautiful land that is being protected right now. And you're like, well, it sounds great to me, because the economy, first of all, the economy's fucking fake and it's not doing as good as you think it is. Second of all, with pipelines, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. They always malfunction. Every single one. Like, and the ones in Unist'ot'en are already malfunctioning. And they aren't, like, they're not even done yet. And it's not because they're not done yet. They're like, oh shit, it's leaking over there a little. And they're like, let's keep going anyway. Like, but yeah, so awareness. Diversify your feed. Donate to Indigenous issues. That's another one. Get your friends on it. Share. You should go to my most recent Instagram post, because I like basically like wrote up all the things and like all the links and a bunch of Instagram accounts to follow, and like everything is all there. Basically the whole caption is like me writing out what I'm trying to say now, but I'm like making it too long. So yeah, if you're more like, oh, how do I help it? I don't know where to go. Read the description, because yay.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. I will link all of this stuff in the description, as well as Lizzy's Instagram. Definitely go follow her. She's been cranking out some dope vids.
Moving on to infographics, I think.
Yeah.
Just read them.
That's all. Yeah. All right. See ya.
All right. Bye-bye.
Yo, how when me eat them, I wonder when me eat. When me tell them, say me no eat no fish, no meat now. How when me eat them, I wonder when me yam. When me tell them, say that I'm a vegan, man. How when me eat